Hello, everyone. My name is Margaret Marshall, and I am a student of the law. Today, my goal is to investigate the facts surrounding the life, crimes, and death of serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21st, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The family moved a lot, which further contributed to his detachment that he would face later on. As he aged, he became more and more antisocial. He withdrew within himself, especially whenever his younger brother was born, which could be because of some resentment that he held, or maybe just that he didn't feel like he was the only child anymore, which happens with multiple children families sometimes. He started drinking alcohol at a young age, which became a very nasty habit, something that also could have contributed to his problems that he faced later on. He was rumored to be assaulted during his own childhood, and while never proven, could also explain some of his actions. One thing that was common about Jeffrey Dahmer's victims was that he preyed on people who were either targets and people who he thought wouldn't be missed. So it was the marginalized people, the people who wouldn't draw attention if they were gone, like they didn't have that much family or they weren't in the spotlight. The neighborhoods where there was a lot of poor people or large concentration of minority groups. So this was a very strategic selection of victims that he made. In my research, I came across a story where Jeffrey Dahmer was found by a police officer um, with a young teen boy, and the teen boy was fleeing away without his clothes, and Dahmer was chasing after him, and the police stopped and inquired about what was happening, but Jeffrey Dahmer, being a white man in a predominantly black neighborhood, explained to the police that that was just his, and I quote, 19-year-old lover. And so the police didn't ask very many questions. In fact, he took Dahmer and the young teen boy back to Dahmer's house and told Dahmer to deal with the boy, and then left. And it was later found that if the police if the police officer would have investigated and looked around further in Dahmer's house that day, they would have found one of his other victims and perhaps discovered what was going on before it escalated like it did. But it was for this very reason the police officer didn't ask very many questions, because he didn't want to question a potentially uncomfortable position for him where it was a white male and most likely a homosexual couple, or at least that's what it looked like. That's what it looked like to him. So he didn't want to put himself in an uncomfortable position, but Dahmer knew this, which is why he carefully chose his targets as he did. Um, this comes into play his childhood, his upbringing, of how he was lonely and sort of withdrew within himself. This closely aligns with the social bonding and control theories. Here she believed that delinquent acts result when an individual's bond to society is weak or broken. So this happened as Dahmer withdrew within himself. He here she believed in the four factors listed on the screen: attachment, commitment, involvement, and belief. So he believed in a strong correlation between these four aspects of life and delinquency. He believed that as attachment, commitment, involvement, and belief strengthened, that people would be led to be compliant with the law and would do as they're supposed to do or what's socially pleasing. And then the opposite is also true, that as they as those things lessened, they had less attachments, less commitment, less involvement, and less belief, that they would be more likely to stray or commit these deviant acts. So as Dahmer withdrew from his family, his friends, and other relationships, those factors correlate with the more he withdrew into himself and the less he was involved with people, then the more he committed these acts and strayed from what was socially acceptable and also what was legally acceptable. Dahmer was even found to say about many of his victims that he killed them because he didn't want to be alone, and then ended up saving their body parts. So that also could be about he wanted control over the system, and he didn't want to be alone. His relationship with his parents was troublesome, to say the least. His mother had been accused of being on prescription drugs and then dealing with mental illness after he was born, so he didn't have a very good relationship with his mother. Whenever she saw how things unfolded, she ended up trying to commit suicide in her later years because that's how much guilt she carried because of how he turned out. And his father was also not present because of his pursuit of his doctoral degree. So the main thing that this brings to question is, could their presence or lack of presence contribute to his crimes? So Dahmer didn't blame his parents. He in fact commented on one point that they did provide him a decent home life. So he didn't blame them for his later crimes, but it is still possible that this has to do with his childhood and his upbringing. And so there's no way it couldn't have had an effect on who he ended up being as an adult man. This leads into Lombroso's theory that criminals are born, not made. He strongly believed that it had to do with genetic factors. And I found it interesting when I was studying Dahmer. There were claims that Dahmer had a surgery during his early childhood, and that he was a very happy and content child before the surgery. But after the surgery, his mother had claimed that he was never the same person, and so this being genetically altering, and also something that happened early in his childhood, would go along with Lombroso's theory that it has to do with genetic factors. Lombroso also suggested that types of criminals known as criminaloids are motivated by passion or have an emotional makeup that compels them under the right circumstances to commit crime. So this very closely aligns with Dahmer's actions as well. It says that they're some of the most dangerous criminals, which would be very true of Dahmer.
Stand right here.
Your Honor, it is over now. This has never been a case of trying to get free. I didn't ever want freedom. Frankly, I wanted death for myself. This was a case to tell the world that I did what I did not for reasons of hate, I hated no one. I knew I was sick or evil or both. Now I believe I was sick. The doctors have told me about my sickness, and now I have some peace. I know how much harm I have caused. I tried to do the best I could after the arrest to make amends, but no matter what I did, I could not undo the terrible harm I have caused. My attempt to help identify the remains was the best that I could do, and that was hardly anything.
In that video, that was during the sentencing of Dahmer, so he did express some remorse. It's still in question whether or not that remorse was genuine, and he still did receive the 16 consecutive life terms in prison, so in other words, prison for the rest of his life, and his life was eventually ended by another inmate who was also in prison convicted of murder. So there are still many factors that are unknown. Whether he was truly contrite of heart or not, there's so many questions about why, how, and by what motivation would someone commit such crimes. Was he born a criminal? Was he forced into it by circumstances? Was he only after control? Personally, I think both. Lombroso had the right idea that there are some elements when people are young as they're growing up, and maybe even genetic things that they lean toward, tendencies that they have from the time they're born. So some of these things definitely came into play with Dahmer. And also, Hershey had the right idea whenever he discussed sort of like the atmosphere, whether people are involved or what they're committed to or the relationships that they have, which I think all of these things were very true with Dahmer too, due to his obsession with not wanting to be alone, and then how he kept his victims' bodies because he claimed to just be that afraid that people were going to leave him. So I think all of these things do come into play. It's very much nature versus nurture, and I think in this case it's both. But regardless, either way, criminals eventually have to pay for their crimes, which Dahmer did, both with prison time but also with his life. Thank you.